So who wants to get started talking about literary fiction? When last we spoke, we ended with a abrupt um, 30-second summary of what I think about literary fiction or how I think it's generally defined. Who wants to start off today?
You want to do a quick recap though first, like the 30 seconds version?
You, you think I'm going to remember?
I shouldn't put you on the spot. Sorry.
No, well, I think basically from, a lot of things that I read about what is literary fiction, almost everything I ever read says it's character driven rather than plot driven. And I think after we had that conversation, somebody shared something about literary fiction that basically makes that point. And I think the other thing that I mentioned is that it just the quality of writing is better. And can I define that or quantify that? No, but it's just, a different quality, a different. I'm not even going to say it's better. It's just a different level of writing that you find in literary fiction. And then you just don't necessarily have to have the the pieces or the tropes or whatever you want to call them that genre fiction requires. That, a lot of literary fiction can be somewhat, for lack of a better word, random, um, and not follow the typical uh, guidelines of a particular genre. Now, that being said, I'm also going to take a dig at MFA because MFA tends to be literary fiction as well, but MFA fiction seems to follow a particular path and order of things. So um, literary fiction can kind of have its tropes as well. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about this as I've been doing stuff in the garden recently that I can't seem to get out of. And we're just getting into fall now, so there's still lots, and the leaves haven't fallen yet. That's its whole big project. Anyway, so what I've been thinking was a lot of people equate classics with literary fiction. Now, classics, books written quite a long time ago, the language is different, they're kind of different, and they're kind of harder for people in our time maybe to read. But I don't think they were necessarily literary fiction to start with when they were written and published. It's just that people find them a bit challenging. So they say, oh, if it's challenging, if I'm having a tough time getting through it, and I've been assigned it in this college course, then it must be literary. I don't think that's always true. I think some literary fiction, or rather some classics like Dickens and maybe even Jane Austen, were kind of the popular fiction of their time, although fewer people were reading for leisure then, because I think poor people either couldn't read or very basic level, or they couldn't afford books. So, so it was limited in that way. Now, I think what Mark was saying about the MFA kind of literary fiction being its own thing, I think it is its own thing, and I think it's frequently not very relatable unless you're in that realm. You're getting your own MFA, or you've got one already, or you're publishing in those little such and such university review of literature type of places, and so yeah, it is its own kind of genre. But I think the really good thing about what's called literary fiction is its conscious use of language, where maybe you're writing some kind of genre, or you're writing in genre fiction, but you use the language in a way that I call artful. That's, maybe not inaccessibly artful, but that shows the reader that the writer has thought about how they use words. And the other thing, of course, is that human interest, or the human condition thing, where what you're zeroing in on is kind of what it's like to live in the world and the challenges you have in that. And maybe you're solving a mystery at the same time, or you're going through, a romance, or it's a thriller, but you have the human condition thing and the conscious use of language to achieve a kind of level of writing that, you touched on that, Mark. And that's really what I have to say about literary fiction.
Well, before you go, I just want to agree with you on the human condition thing. I think that's another element that it's just basically it's about humanity.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, Well, the two of you have left me absolutely nothing because you made all the points I was going to make, and I'll just quickly summarize how I was going to make it, which was to Mark's point first that it is really focused on, the characters, the themes, and not necessarily the plot at all. I mean, focus wise, and very usually tied to realism, and so again, getting rid of all the genres. It's really focused on that. And then what you brought up, Audrey, I was going to say, which is sometimes people ascribe classics to literary fiction, and it's almost makes literary fiction more or less and I believe this across the board, a post hoc label. Like after it's gotten literary review, but to the last point you made was, I think, the most critical, which is when I've read anything that's considered literary fiction, um, there's something about the writing where the person is actually focusing on the language and writing itself, right? It is like poetry in an expanded novel form. The poetry at the root is the word, to put as much emphasis and character into the actual words that are there. And literary fiction to me is like that on a broad scope. It is that almost love or analysis sometimes of the written word that is used as the focus. So and that's why sometimes I don't even think, I know they often say character in literary fiction, but sometimes it's not always that. I think and I don't know if I should, no, I'm not going to throw names out because I'll probably botch it, um, but there are authors I've read where I just feel that I feel like they're just love of the language, or they're just showcasing the written language. So anyway, but yeah, pretty much everything you both said and were the points I was going to bring up, which leaves Berthold possibly nothing.
Well, I mean, it's probably good because, like, I think this started because I said I'd like to write literary fiction, but I don't know how. I can't write literary fiction apparently, so I don't know. I probably have nothing much to contribute on it other than to say that when I read it done well, okay, all right, here's what I'll contribute. Done well, as like Mark and Kevin Brennan and other people do it. I love literary fiction. Done badly, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it. The Great Gatsby to me is literary fiction done badly. So
I dislike that book too.
well, I'll say this. I'll say this for it's well, technically speaking, he's a good writer. It's well,
right. It's well written.
But what was the point? I'm baffled.
I mean,
Well, that's kind of maybe a little bit of a piece of literary fiction that we're not talking about. What is the point with some things that are classified as literary fiction? And in particular, what I consider to be MFA literary fiction. I used to read subscribe to Glimmer Train, and it's a pretty well known, well considered literary magazine, and I consider it to be the what's the word I'm looking for? It is MFA literary fiction. That is what they publish, and after a certain while reading their stories, it's like, what am I reading? I don't, it's like these stories just kind of, and then they just stop and they don't go anywhere. I mean, what was the point? So
Yeah, I think you're right. I think actually Glimmer Train apparently is now deceased or
it
defunct.
is.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I think they ran out of money or something and decided to fold. Yeah, that's the thing. That's the sort of the downside of literary fiction is that it's often plotless. It kind of wants to show you the human condition and it kind of wallows in it, but in the end, not much happens. And actually maybe it's just hard to write that kind of thing well. and which is why so many people just don't relate to it. But when, like you say, Bertold, when you see it done well, it's really good. It's just that often it's just not that good at all. So, yeah.
After this conversation, I'm going to have to rethink whether or not what I really do is write literary fiction, because I don't feel like these different points necessarily describe my approach to writing. So, for instance, character driven, and you guys have read some of my stuff. Maybe you'll disagree with me, but I've always viewed my stories and how I come up with my ideas as they're situation driven. That I come up with a situation and put somebody in the situation, and then I write the story. And then this, love of language or whatever, I don't really have that. I don't really, with the exception of one piece I wrote, which was The Irreparable Past, I've never really written with the idea of trying to use language in a particular way. So I don't know. Maybe I write something other than literary fiction. Who knows?
No, no, I think you're assuming that every element has to be there that we talked about to be literary
Yeah.
fiction, but it does not. It's like I would say someone who intentionally ignores the plot is not writing literary fiction. That is just that the focus again, the focus foci, is that correct? Are on those elements, but you do not need all of them to be. As far as just mention, because you talked about, this situation you put people in a plot and whether or not, that carries weight. I feel like, again, depends on what I've read, that it's considered by others literary fiction. The plot is like Godot, it doesn't have to be there. It's not the focus, like I said, but that doesn't mean that's not the reason why the characters are there and the characters are interacting. There is a plot. It's just in the background. It may never show up as in Gatsby. Well, I think also with Gatsby, a little bit jaded on our part because the concept of somebody who has everything and ends up killing himself almost for seemingly maybe no reason or for love or whatever it is, was maybe more alien at that time and where, we're so much used to is like, anyway, but it wasn't at the forefront. He was focused in that book on the characters themselves and their interactions. And again, I would say just the way he wrote, like you said, it was really well written. Still don't like it.
I'm actually surprised you'd say Gatsby was terrible. What's the point? I mean, stuff happened in it, right? All kinds of things happened. There was that car crash, and
Well,
and
then
then
true things happened, and I know there's a whole literature out there about, well, what did the green light across the river mean and things like that you can
right, the symbolism and
You're bringing high school English back to me. I hated high school English for this very reason. You know what the green light meant? It meant go.
well, there was that car accident.
In fairness,
the thing for me with Great Gatsby is it just has so much. It's so built up as this great American classic, right. And I read it and I thought, why? Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like, I'll just analogize to another art form. It's like the Rolling Stones. Everybody of a certain age, not everybody, but so many people love the Rolling Stones. They think they're the greatest rock band in the world, and I listen to their music and I say, why? The Great Gatsby is the Rolling Stones of the early 20th century literary world for me.
You're right.
I will just add to that, worst concert I ever saw. Just want to tell you,
So.
But you're right. Sometimes I think, in fact, let's face it, there are times when people, how can I put this? When works, whether it's music or literature or anything, are vaulted and with good reason. Like you can read the analysis and find why people have done that. But then there is the popular swelling of people who now say, well, they said it's good and I must like it. And I know why I like it. And I may not really like it, but I don't want to admit that to everybody. So what happens is you get more of a cloud around it, and it just becomes this bigger thing than it is, you know. So you get the popular, oh, untouchable. These are the gods of literature, music, etc. And you know they're not. They're not. It's just that simple. It's you know certain bodies of work that they had were really good, and then everybody just assumes that we must now pray to that. So
Very
So
nicely put. I agree.
yeah,
one of the things, it would be interesting if we could figure out how to discuss this, and I don't know really how to, but Kevin and Brennan and I have gone back and forth in comments on blog posts and in emails about how virtually impossible it is to sell literary fiction as an independent publisher or as a self-publisher. It just doesn't work, and it's monumentally frustrating for both of us. He should have so many more readers and people buying his books than he does, and he can't get it done. And he's tried to get an agent for some of the last couple of books that he's published, and they aren't even looking at it.
yeah, you know, and that's easy to understand actually, because let's face it, literary fiction in and of itself is not written to be marketable, right? And it's not written to be, you know, it's written for, again, a love of the craft is what I always go back to.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's hard to get in the door with an agent. It's hard, you know, and I always feel like um whenever I read the stories of people who have published literary fiction, almost always in their biographies, there's a connection to people in the literary world, the editors and the publishers, and
Yeah.
that they're in, and people who are willing to look at that work, etc., and back it.
Yeah.
And then, to be fair to them, they have a hard sell to their own companies to put this stuff out, because again, it's not like, oh, it's not a romance. A romance is our biggest seller or whatever it is. So, you know, I get,
No.
and if you're trying to do it on your own, not even having that person to fight for you, forget it. You know, I
Yeah.
guess, yeah, it's logically makes sense to me at least.
Okay.
Also, there's the whole awards thing. You know, they like the really big awards, like the Booker and the in Canada the Giller Prize and of course Nobel prizes and all
Nobel
that.
Prize, yeah.
And those do tend to pick literary fiction, and it's just the traditional publishers too, probably the big five or the big four or however many of them there are now. And with those guys, they have like sort of niche imprints for that, for literary fiction.
Right.
So
They have,
if you
yeah.
find out, if you see a book, you know, with a certain publisher name on it, it'll likely just be a slice of one of the big publishers that's focused, you know, like this is their literary arm or toe or whatever. So yeah, so it's marketed as what it is, and it has a whole mechanism to support it. And really, I think there are probably way more people writing in that mode that never see the light of day, either even if they are traditionally published. And it's only a very few that hit the top, that win those awards, and then everybody buys their book. Whether they read the book or not is another question, but it's marketed in that particular way, and I think very few people succeed, just like very few writers in general really
Yeah,
succeed,
that's true.
especially financially.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a good.
Speaking of, do we want to move on to pricing now?
Sure. I'm a bit hazy on this one, but it was kind of inspired by reading Chuck Litka's posts about using free books as his business model, which is sort of seems to be a contradictory way of doing it. Like if you're giving them away for free, how is that a business model? But that's if you define success as being not financial, and thus you can reach more readers. And then there's the question of, if you give them away for free, will anyone read them? And I just recently finished reading one of his books, The Bright Black Sea, which is like a space adventure. It's sort of like a seafaring adventure, only in space. And it's really quite interesting. If you haven't read it, I recommend it, and it's like free. But I noticed that on Smashwords, which is where I got my copy, he's got like tons of reviews for that thing. And I've found from my own experiences that very, very few people will review a book on Smashwords. Like they bought it there. That's the only way you can get to post a review. But most books just have very few reviews, and that one has a lot. So obviously, a lot of people have read it and reviewed it, which and I think that's on Goodreads as well. So it isn't true that people won't read your book. Like they'll pick it up for free and then they'll just stash it. I think a lot of people pick up books that they pay for and don't read them or don't review them either. And so I think if you're looking for just people to read your book, giving it away for free is a viable option. Now, I did that with my first book. I did the Amazon price matching, where you give it away for free somewhere and then that's noticed and then Amazon will reduce it to free for you. But I think at some point I decided I'd go for the Amazon exclusive thing. So I had to join follow by their rules. And so it wasn't free anymore. It was 99 cents and I had the free days and all that other stuff. And as a series starter, I think if you're writing a real series, where you have a compelling genre type piece of fiction, you probably could make the first one free and then people will pick up the subsequent ones. But my series, the second and third and fourth books really are kind of different from the first one, and they don't really follow the series model. And I think probably the way it works best is with shorter books that are kind of similar to one another. I wouldn't recommend it so much the price the first one free and hope the second, third, fourth, etc., get picked up. So right now I price my first book at 99 cents. And I have a couple of others in my 7 books that are 99 cents. And whether that really works or not, I'm just not going to say because it's hard to say. So I'll just leave it up to you guys to carry on.
I can go next, but I'm going to be probably of little or no help to most people with my strategy. However, I could let you know a little bit about how one publishing arm, which is Amazon, works. I, again, have said this before, I really write for the fun of it, and I want to tell stories. I want people to be entertained. I want them to laugh. That's my goal. I already had a career, haven't had a career. I'm not looking to make money on my books. However, having said that, the way I originally priced my hardcovers, or I should say soft covers, paperbacks, I would make about a quarter on each one. So whatever, the way they do it is they estimate the cost of your book based on the number of pages, because that's going to involve printing and distribution, et cetera. When they ship, there's a certain weight and all that. So they have some formula. And then I originally went with CreateSpace, and then CreateSpace got bought over by Amazon. That's how I actually ended up there. But I was with CreateSpace, and they had that formula. And then, of course, they get their cut on top of that. So it's the printing cost and that. And their cut is usually seemed to be somewhere around $4 or something. So my first book, I think, came out to like $9.25 as the base price, and so I priced it at $9.50 or maybe even $9.99. I made a little bit more than that, but I wanted to keep it below $10. However, an option on Amazon is to release your book in other channels besides their own, which means libraries, or if indie bookstores can order it and stock it, and colleges, etc. So to do that channel, though, like Barnes and Noble can sell your book, et cetera, other, which I eventually did. But when you do it, they want their cut, which on my book came out to about $4. So I had to raise the price of my book $4, which didn't make me happier. Technically, when it's bought on Amazon, I get that additional $4. And if it's not, I don't, but I don't care about that. It just, to me, overprices my book. However, I have been in a post, I've been railed about being on Amazon. So for those people, I don't want to alienate them, and it is out there on other venues like Barnes and Noble, et cetera. So you don't have to buy it through Amazon. But anyway, So that's how I price the paperback books. I about a quarter or to 50 cents profit for me. The digital books, however, I just again I know I'm not a major author by any sense of the word. In fact, by no sense of the word. So I want to price my book as accommodating as possible. However, if I felt like if I price it too cheaply, nobody's going to want to buy it because they're going to think it's garbage just from the price. It's not odd, but that's psychology, right? Human psychology. So I think I settled on $1.99. I have to go back and look, but I think that's what I settled on for my paperbacks. But every so often, I'm allowed to do a free giveaway, and I do that because actually, I like that. I usually get a good turnout too. And again, that's my goal. I hit the microphone. That's my goal is to get my story out there. So, so that's really it. So that's how I priced in within that publishing house, which is Amazon, is minimum for my paperbacks and for the digital, just what I think is a reasonable for an average book, $1.99. I don't know. Although it's weird, I do see some books out there, popular books, where the digital price is more than the paperback, and that just boggles my mind. Like and these are from main authors, and I don't quite understand why that is. It's the cost of doing it is nothing, next to nothing. It's service, storage, and maintenance. That's it. So.
It annoys me when I see a Kindle book for like $10 or something.
Yeah, yeah.
They're traditionally marketed big name Kindle books are 12.99, 14.99.
Right.
It's just ridiculous.
And sometimes you'll find the paperbacks for that at 10.99 or 12.99.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like mystery to me, but whatever.
Well, it's not a mystery. They're corporations maximizing their profit. And if
guess.
people are going to spend 14.99 on an ebook, then they're going to charge it.
Yeah.
Unless PG Woodhouse comes back from the dead to write a new book, I'm not spending that on an ebook.
Yeah, I think $5 is $4.99 is the most you should charge for an ebook, unless there's something special about it, like it's got lots of pictures or something. But yeah, I don't think I ever, if I see a price of more, like, how you see books promoted on blogs saying new release by so and so, if it's more than that much in Canadian dollars, I kind of say, maybe I'll wait.
I should point out I'm talking US dollars. Also, Audrey, you triggered something in my mind. When I first did my pricing, that was 2016. And we're at 2023, almost 24.
Yeah.
I should probably up it $1. Again, I don't want it to seem, I'm not looking for the profit, but I want it to seem like it's a reasonable book, because it is, or they are. I think they're not bad. So I wouldn't publish them.
Yeah, I've been doing this since 2012, and this past year is the first time I've got emails from the publishing platform, and I've seen other writers talk about this on Twitter and other places as well, where they're being notified that the production costs are going up, so you might want to reconsider, consider repricing your books. And what I do kind of like what you do, Richard, which is basically whatever I, keep the price of a paperback as low as possible and make about $1. And that's about it. And also if I go somewhere and try to sell my books to people in person, it's just $10 a book. And the author's price, I actually would make more money on that than I would selling it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble for $12.99. The $12.99 price again might make me $1. Selling a book that I got the author's price for $10, I actually make a few dollars on those. For ebooks, I think it was interesting, Audrey, that you mentioned $4.99. That's about as much as I'll charge for an ebook, and I frequently might do that for a while and then drop it to $2.99, and then every once in a while, I might do a 99-cent thing or a free thing for a few days. Draft to digital, all of these different ebook publishers run different promos. Apple, Kobo, um, Smashwords, the ones that make books available for libraries, but you have to drop your price in order to get into the promotional effort. So whenever they do that, if I'm accepted, then I drop the price, however it needs to be dropped to be in that. But Richard, you mentioned something that I think is an interesting thought that I have had for years, which is people who have an aversion to reading self-published authors because they think the product is going to be crap will look at the prices of our books and compare them to traditionally published books and say, "Oh, why are they only charging $2.99?" And that it just kind of I've always wondered and it takes some marketing effort to get your book in front of people, but what if I priced my ebook for $12.99? Would I
The,
actually could that actually work?
the
No, I
problem is,
know.
if you get too close to the published author's price,
Yeah,
someone will say, "Why would I risk on the unknown
no,
rather
I
than
know.
somebody who's gotten all these rave reviews?" Right.
I
So it's
know.
you balance between you want it to be, look, I'm not bargain basement, but I understand you're not going to want to risk, on me.
Right, right,
Although you should. Out
right.
there, everyone, you should.
So I wanted to ask you another question about some stuff that you said. You mentioned Amazon's expanded distribution and having indies stock your books. So I had expanded distribution on some of my books, and when I would Google to see where they were available, I couldn't find them. I found one of my books on Barnes and Noble and another one of my books somewhere else, but other than that, they were nowhere.
Right.
It's
I
only with
actually, my first book, The Devil and the Wolf, it showed up on Barnes and Noble, and if you Google other places, it does show up there.
yeah,
But Perseus Kills His Grandfather for some reason never showed up on Barnes and
yeah.
Noble, and I think there's something weird about the ISBN code I created because it freaks out other places too, like
Huh.
Goodreads. There's two versions of it, um, uh, but yeah, but they do show up on Google, and that was when I did the expanded channel. So maybe try again. I don't know, but
But I
yeah.
switched to draft to digital, and now I know that all five of my published books are pretty much everywhere.
Oh, okay, there you
They're
go.
they're on Pals, they're on Books a Million, they're on Amazon,
Walmart. One of
they're at
mine, at least, is at Walmart, of all
yeah,
places.
mine are at Walmart, mine are at the Harvard bookstore.
Yeah.
But anyway, the other thing is there are lots of people who've told me that there are a lot of indie bookstores who will not stock your book if you only publish through Amazon.
Mhm.
I
I think
actually, yeah.
if you want, yep, stocked by bookstores, you have to go through that Lightning Source, or
Yeah,
I can't remember the other names. It's got two names. Anyway, you have to set up. There's a fee and all that, and then I think you have to cancel the expanded distribution through
yeah,
Amazon.
probably.
Then you'll be distributable to
Through
bookstores. I haven't done that myself. Maybe I should.
I have one story. It's just one, so I don't want to judge all indie bookstores by this. But I did go to an indie bookstore that kept putting out, help us, help us, help us, help us. Right? We're an indie bookstore. So I went there and I said, "Look, I'm an indie author, and I will give you 10 copies of my book to sell." And they told me, "Well, we have just so much shelf space." So I was like, "Okay, thank you. Indie supporting indie is out the door here."
Yeah. Did you have any comments on your pricing strategy, Bertold?
Well, it's probably bad because all mine are 99 cents. So everybody looks at them and goes, oh, that's crap, and moves on. I will say, so on Smashwords, there's this neat feature where you can say the person purchasing it chooses the price. They can choose free or they can
Yeah,
choose whatever they
yeah,
want,
yeah.
which for the one book I have on there, that's what I've set it to. And I think both people who purchased it chose it for the 99 cents anyway. So
I would love to do that on Amazon if I could. I would.
I think that's really cool. I think it's a neat idea because,
It is.
you know, if there's
Right.
one person out there who's like, I would pay $10 to read a new, I
Right.
just love him so much, and then everybody else pays nothing, you know, it's all good. Uh,
That's one, but you should be able to adjust that after you read the book.
that would be interesting. Although, I think they changed this recently, but wasn't there something where like people were reading books and then returning them and offering
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
had a return policy, but they've kind of tweaked that quite a bit. Yeah, people were just taking it wild advantage of it. So
So maybe I need to up the prices on my books so people think, oh, this is really, you know.
I always look at I have to admit, even though it doesn't matter for ebooks, I always look at the size of the book. And if somebody's written a 500-page book and they're charging let's say $4.99 for it, and it looks good, I'll go for it. But if they've written a novella that's 30,000 words and they're charging $4.99 or even more, I'll say, maybe I'll wait until they're doing one of those Amazon free days or something, and then I'll do it.
That
Or
actually
they
raises
their senses.
that actually raises a point that I forgot to make. If I write something that can be classified as a novel, I might go up to $4.99, but if it's a novella, then I'm only going to go up to $2.99. So,
Right.
so I have a question for you as readers before we end this, if we're done with pricing. And I think Richard and Bertold might know about this because of social media. Have you ever read a book that you really, really enjoyed and then picked it up 15 years later and started reading and thought, what the hell was I thinking? And I'll tell you, I have mentioned on here The Book Thief as one of the top books I've ever read. And after years of wanting to reread it, I found a used copy in a bookstore in Oregon, so I bought it and I started reading it, and I couldn't even get into it. I mean, I couldn't get past 20 or 30 pages, and I decided there must be something better to read.
I'd like to go first on this if I could, just because it is very relevant. In general, everything I read in the past that I've reread, I still love. That is true.
Same here. Same with me.
Right. But recently, somebody triggered a memory, and I posted this on social media of a book that I read 50 years ago and loved. It was The Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart, and the whole series I
Yeah.
love. But the first one itself, especially because that was the Herculean effort of bringing you back into that time frame. And then once you're there, the follow-ups were still in that time frame. It's nothing negative to them. Just saying that first one carries more of the weight, and I thought it was beautiful. However, after suggesting it to everyone and putting it out there, a lot of people replying saying, "Oh, I'm gonna." I realized I said maybe I should reread that, and because it's funny, Mark, just like you said, there are things maybe they're not books, but maybe movies I have seen or TV shows from ages, and I go to rewatch and I think, gosh, what did I really like about that? It hasn't aged well, in my mind. So I said to myself after doing this, I'm a little worried. People reading on it, but you know what? I have faith in my past self. I really, really was impressed with that book, and I'm just going to assume it still is. So,
Yeah, I like that book too. I've reread it a few times, but even that was a long time
a
ago.
long time
And I
ago,
have to
right?
say,
Yeah.
now that there's so many books out there that even the books I used to reread regularly, I haven't been doing as much. And ones that I've kind of read once and mostly liked and think, oh, I might reread that someday. I don't know if I ever will. So I really can't answer this question because I haven't I haven't had that disillusioning effect lately, but it's probably because I just haven't done as much rereading.
Yeah, yeah, that's true too. Same thing here.
I've been sort of racking my brain trying to think if there's a book like this. I'm not coming up with one, but maybe I haven't. Maybe I need to reread some books that I haven't read for a long time and see it. No, don't do it.
No, do it. Actually, do it.
Because there have been, I'll say this, I've certainly had things where it's the opposite, where it was like I tried to read something when I was younger and I was like, I can't get this at all. And then I come back to it when I'm older and like now I get it. Now I see why this is good. Um, I've had that experience, but I can't think of one where I just yeah, I'm like, what did I see in this? I'm sure I'll get it with something. Oh, well, okay, I'll this is embarrassing, but I'll say this. Probably if I read a Harry Potter book now, I would be I would be like, but I can excuse that because I was 10 years old when I read it. So um
Hmm.
This is the age difference we're told. My son was 10 years old when he read it.
well that was the age to be to read it.
Yeah, no, I know. I read them when they were reading them to see what they were reading, and they're good stories, but there's nothing, it fits the audience that it was intended for perfectly well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So anyway, anything else?
Good question, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm just really disappointed because I've always, for 15 years at least, I've had this memory of this book as just being incredible, and I just nope, can't do it.
That probably means that if you really like the book, you've only read it once, maybe you should just leave it be.
Yeah, I
Who
am.
needs to be disillusioned by something like that? I mean, there's enough disillusioning things around in life.
Yep, yep.
Actually, this is a good question, but how often do you, I don't know, maybe how often isn't the right part of the question, but rereading books is what I want to sort of bring up. And I know, again, when you first start reading, actually, Audrey, as you pointed out, there's so much more to read and read. But when you first start getting into reading, you do. I think I did tend to reread books quite often. But I will say this: there are books that I will revisit every 5 or 10 years, whatever it is, because they just really hit me in one way or another, and I have to go back to them. Maybe in a positive, maybe it was powerful, maybe it was just lighthearted, but whatever it is, I go back to them. But how often do I do that? To Audrey's point, less and less as I get
Mhm.
older, because there's more and more. But is there a criteria? I don't know, or are there criteria, I should say. I don't know. I don't know. There might be, if I really analyze it, of what makes me want to go back to specific books, as opposed to others. But I do that on a regular basis, just less and less.
I
Mhm.
I don't reread books anywhere near as often as I did when I was a kid. I mean, I've said that when I was a kid, our family, we played outside, we played games, and we read, and we all read, and we read voraciously. And
Yep.
so, there was a book that I checked out of the library over and over again about Man O' War, a racehorse um, in the 19 teens or the early 1920s that basically raced for 1 year, and he was so dominant that there was no point in him racing again. And other books, and the Lord of the Rings. When I first read that, that became like something I would read every year or every other year for the next 10 years. And
Me too.
some Stephen King books that I've reread, The Shining, some other ones. But now I don't reread things very often. I wanted to reread The Book Thief because of my memory of it, and I wanted to experience it again. And I think that's what it is the books that really hit me when I read them. Every once in a while, I want to re-experience that. And so I do. And then I was just thinking while you were talking, sometimes someone will make a comment about reading a book that I had read before that I enjoyed. And the book that jumped into my head when I thought that was someone mentioned that they were reading or wanted to read The Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet. And I loved that book when I read it. So when I saw that, it's like, yeah, I want to reread it. So I'll reread it because someone mentions it. But I hardly ever reread books these days. So
Mm.
Yeah, I think it was a thing from print book days. When you had your collection of books sitting on your shelf, and that's what you had. And so if you thought of a book and you know the feelings you had about it and stuff, there it was, and you go and reread it. Now there's so much else out there. Like there's tons of ebooks. Like nobody used to talk about a TBR list back then.
Yeah.
And now everyone's got a huge TBR, you know, and it's often ebooks, and you just don't have time to reread.
Yeah.
That triggers something too. We talk about every so often the difference between, what you prefer, ebooks or physical books, whatever, but that is something about a physical book. Its actual presence on your bookshelf. And I know I have reread books because I'm moving the books out of one room to another so I could paint that room or whatever I'm doing. And as I'm handling the books, memories, whatever, and I might reread one. I might go through it again. So yeah, that's a difference I never thought about between an ebook and a physical book, is its actual physical presence that can remind you and make you want to reread it.
So all this is starting to make me wonder, why do we even bother writing more books? There's already too many on the damn thing.
Well, I'll answer this.
There's always new audiences who one day hopefully will reread our books, but
I can answer this, Audrey,
Okay.
because I've got Tales from the Annex sitting on my shelf, and tomorrow is October, and that means I'll be rereading Ice Cream Truck from Hell. So.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that.
Okay. Anything else?
I don't think so. Not today.
Although I never noticed the raccoons before, Audrey.
Oh, yeah.
That
Behind you. I
raccoon
never
picture.
noticed that.
Yeah. Some friend of my husband's painted that, and he's also got another picture. Let's see, where did I put it? Of a wolf. Just hang on. I'll show you.
Well, now I have to see that.
Yeah, we've got to have the wolf.
I would say, you don't have to normally, but if it's a wolf, I got.
See
Oh, yeah.
this one.
Yeah,
pretty cool, eh?
That is
reminds
fantastic.
me of someone I know. Yeah.
Yeah, that one was sitting next to the raccoons, and I'd actually take it down because I thought, man, that's just too in your face, and it'd be too distracting. So I kind of put it somewhere else. But there it is. Yeah, he's pretty good with those two pictures.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Have a good rest of the
Next
weekend.
time. Yeah.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.